Over the past 10 years, I've spent over $4,000 on lights to make my videos. But if I'm being completely honest, I only use about 750 worth of lights to achieve this result, which I love. So in other words, over the past 10 years, I've wasted $3,500 by not knowing about lights. So in this video, I want to teach you what I've learned so that hopefully you can avoid wasting money on lights that you'll never use. But before we get into types of lights, let me show you how you should be thinking about lighting if you want to look like a pro fast. Looking at most talking head setups, which is what we call this when we're sitting talking to camera, I like to split it into 3 zones, which are light in your face, light in your ass, and light in your background. So once you've lit these, you're gonna look absolutely fab. Now, how exactly do you do this? Well, let's start with the most important zone, your face. Check this out. Which of these do you find more flattering? Believe it or not, both of these setups use the same exact light. The difference is that one of them is being softened using a diffuser, which we'll talk about later. But the main thing we're looking at in our first zone is it needs to be a big soft light. What I mean by this is that the smaller a light source, the less flattering it is. It can be really harsh and unforgiving, leaving shadows and emphasizing bumps and wrinkles and imperfections, and we don't want that. But once you introduce something called a diffuser, which is designed to spread that light out over a larger area, you get a much softer light wrapping around you, reducing those hard shadows and creating a much softer and flattering look. That's exactly what's happening when you see YouTubers sitting under those huge softboxes. They look like giant lights, but they're actually just diffusers that are spreading out a small light behind them. The bigger and softer the light source, the more flattering your face will look. That's the secret for zone 1. When we're lighting your face, we're looking for the largest, softest lighting that you can get. So what about zone 2? How exactly do you light your ass? Well, you don't literally. It's actually the back of your head and your shoulders that we're lighting, but fab sounded way better than fb. Let me show you exactly what this second zone does. This is often called a hair light or a rim light, and the idea is simple. Placing a light behind you, pointing back towards the camera, position slightly above and off to the side. This creates a nice glow around your head and shoulders, clearly separating you from the background. Now, should this be soft like that light in zone 1? Actually, no. For this zone, we want something that is bright and directional, more like a spotlight. Why? Because that soft diffuse light isn't going to travel very far. Since this hair or rim light needs to be placed farther away, a focused directional spotlight works best. So, quick recap for zone 2. We want a bright directional light that's positioned behind to separate you from the background. Then for our final zone, let's talk about light in that background. Now, this one is totally up to your personal style and your brand. Do you want a bright, airy look? Do you want something more dark and moody? Or maybe colorful and vibrant? I recommend you consider your audience and your content. If you're a tech reviewer, then a darker, sleek background might fit perfectly. If you're into health and wellness, then a bright, fresh background might work better for you. And if you're a gamer or a live streamer, colorful lights and a moody setup could really set the tone. Your background is your chance to show your viewers who you are and what you're about. So there's no strict rule here, but generally speaking, softer lighting will look best. Why do I say that? Because harsh, direct light creates distracting shadows behind shelves or plants or anything else decorative that's behind you. So now that you understand exactly what each lighting zone need, let's dive into the 4 main types of lights that you're going to come across and figure out which ones are perfect or terrible for each of these 3 zones. By the end of this next section, you're going to know exactly what lights you should buy and, more importantly, which ones to avoid wasting your money on. The first type of lights are probably the most common and beginner friendly. They're LED panels. These are basically rows of small LED bulbs covered by a white sheet of perspex, which acts as our diffuser. They come in various sizes and brands, but they all essentially do the same thing. So how do LED bulb panels stack up for each zone? Zone 1, for our face, do these LED panels meet our large and soft lighting requirement? Kind of, because they're usually desk mounted, so the panels are close to you. They can feel relatively large and soft, but a single panel may still feel too directional and harsh. To fix this, you're going to want to use 2 panels. Having 2 lights also gives you the flexibility to create some contrast by turning one brighter than the other to give you an effect like this. So yes, LED panels can absolutely work for Zone 1. And in fact, I used them for years and got great results, but there are a couple of downsides. They can feel intense if you're filming for long periods. I personally found myself getting real headaches after hour-long sessions. And if you're a glasses wearer like me, then reflections can be tricky to avoid. So let's give it a score of 4 out of 5. Now, what about Zone 2? These are great for lighting you from behind. They're pretty lightweight and flat, so they can be mounted on your ceiling or on top of a bookcase and will throw enough light back at you. And as they almost always come with remotes, you can put them in place and then fine-tune them while you're sitting in position. If you are looking at buying an LED panel for Zone 2, try to get one with barn doors on it so that it can keep that light directed on you. We're going to say 5 stars. So would we use them for Zone 3? Yeah, they're great for the same reason as in Zone 2, making it easy to flood a wall with light or create a nice gradient. And the RGB version gives you any color you want, as well as white. So you can add some color to your background if you want and change it up as often as you like. However, a word of warning, if you do use these to light your background, make sure that they are behind you, else that light is going to spill onto you, which is especially bad if you're using colored RGB lights. 5 stars. So panel lights are really universal and get a tick in each box and are probably the easiest to get started with. How about a ring light? Nope, 1 star.
Yeah, but what about...
1 star. Now on to our third type. They're lightsabers. Sorry, tube lights. These lights are incredibly popular right now and they're pretty versatile, but let's see how they actually hold up against our 3 zones. Zone 1? No, they're not that flexible. Remember what we need for lighting your face? Large, soft, flattering light. Tube lights are the exact opposite. They're long and thin, although funnily enough, I did once recommend these to a client who was filming right up against her wall, and because we put this tube just above her camera, it actually gave a decent result. But generally speaking, these aren't the best choice for most setups. So sorry Vader, but we're gonna have to give these a 2 for Zone 1. Zone 2? Now we're talking. This is actually what I'm using here because they're long, they wrap light around you and give the impression of a much larger light. Plus, they're incredibly thin and can fit almost anywhere with mounting points all over them. And they have decent batteries too. These get a 5 star for this zone. And finally, Zone 3. Yeah, while they may not throw as much light as a panel due to the light being spread out wider, you can hide them easier, and again, they give a full RGB color option. Due to these being typically more expensive than a light panel, we'll give them 4 stars. Then finally, we have cob lights. These are a little different because they come in 2 parts. The main light itself and then a diffuser or softboxer that you attach separately. Zone 1, your face. These are perfect if you have the space for them. And you'll find them used by most filmmakers, which should say a lot about them. A cob light paired with a large softbox will give you that beautiful, soft, professional look that we were talking about earlier. But be aware, they're not exactly discreet. If you're working from a small office or your desk is right up against a wall, a big soft light isn't going to fit there easily. In that case, you're probably better off with LED panels. But if you can rearrange your setup to accommodate them, cob lights are unbeatable. Personally, I love them because they eliminate that intense headache-inducing glare. Since a cob light with a large softbox spreads the light across a wider area, it feels gentler on your eyes, meaning no more headaches after those long filming sessions. I'm going to give cob lights a 5+.
You can't do that, it only goes up to 5.
All right, fine, then we'll give it a 5. Zone 2, your ass. Well, your hair light. Are they any good? Not really if you're going to be using a softbox, unless you have a lot of space above you. But you can switch out that softbox for something more directional, like a snoot or just a reflector that likely came with your light in the first place. And then it's going to be perfect. If you can set it 6 foot or more at 45 degrees behind you, it'll do a fantastic job. 5 stars. What about zone 3, your background? Yes, in so many ways. It's what I'm using to light up that back wall. And do you know what? I'm actually pointing it to the ceiling right now and bouncing it off there to create a much wider spread than I could ever get with a softbox. Or you could point it at the wall through a softbox, or if you want to get creative, you could use what's called a gobo and some shapes, and this light can open up a ton of creative options, like giving the impression of window light coming in. So yeah, 5 stars again, baby. Wait, did we just give Cobb Lights 3 perfect scores? Yeah. Yes, we did. So there are your options. Before you go shelling out on your next light, remember what you've learned here. Put it through the fab filter, and if it didn't get full marks, don't buy it. But before you head over to Amazon, you're there already, aren't you? Come back. I've still got 3 crucial lessons you need to hear before you spend a dime. The first lesson is that you get what you pay for. Trust me, I've learned this the hard way. Now, you don't need to get the fanciest, most expensive equipment out there, but cheap lights will disappoint you. They're usually inaccurate, tricky to adjust, and you'll quickly outgrow them. Instead, invest in one decent, reliable light for each zone, and you'll save yourself money and headaches in the long run. Lesson number 2 is to stick to one brand if possible. Why? Because you'll be able to control all of your lights with one app. This is one of the best decisions I ever made with my studio. It's so easy for me to sit here and balance all of my room lighting on my own. So if you're just buying one light initially, make sure that the brand also offer any other lights that you may want to add later, and that they will all work off the same controller. The third and final lesson for this video is that even the best lighting won't make up for a bad camera. Lighting is incredibly important, but it won't magically fix a bad camera or low quality webcam. Great lighting plus a decent camera is the magic combination. But wait, does decent camera mean expensive? Not necessarily. In fact, I've got just the video for you where I put a $500 camera up against a $2,000 one to see if paying the extra is really worth it.